This year, the 2014 World Cup is due to take place in Brazil, where daytime temperatures could actually exceed 30 degrees Celsius. Now, if you thought that was extreme, think to the year 2022, where at the moment the FIFA World Cup is due to take place in Doha, Qatar, where daytime temperatures can actually exceed 50 degrees Celsius. Now, I'm here at Plymouth Argyle Football Club to speak to the groundskeeper and their head physio to find out how those sorts of conditions can affect the pitch and the players themselves. So, Paul, can you tell us how playing at altitude could affect a player's performance?
When you've got altitude, there's a lack of oxygen in the air, so the lack of oxygen has an effect on the player's body. It's most noticeable, I think, in the last World Cup that Mexico hosted, 1986, I think it was. That was played at altitude. When you get above 5,000 feet, there's a significant drop in the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere, and that leads to a decrease in performance on the players through lack of oxygen. So there's ways of combating this, and that's by training. They have an adage: live high and train low. So you live in the altitude conditions, and the body makes adaptations to those conditions.
And as a physio, what sort of training can you do to help a player prepare for those sort of conditions?
There's now things like altitude chambers where you can decrease or increase the altitude within a chamber, and then you can do fitness training within those chambers, and that prepares the body. The body makes adaptations over a period of weeks to cope with the lack of oxygen mainly.
So Paul, have you got any specific advice for the England players out there in Brazil at the moment?
I think playing in Brazil, they're not going to reach the extremes of altitude that Mexico World Cup had, but I think the highest venue is 3,000, just over 3,000 feet, which is probably getting on for the height of Ben Nevis, so it probably would be like playing football at the top of Ben Nevis. England just recently completed their training camp in Portugal, where they were hoping to encounter hotter climates. Unfortunately, I don't think that came about, so you'll have seen news clips of the England players training with lots of layers of clothing on and wet jackets to make them sweat and encounter the sort of humid, hot conditions that they're going to experience in Brazil.
Well, one of the main problems for our team is obviously adapting to the heat that's going to happen in Brazil, and this is always a factor for the majority of the European teams. It normally takes maybe 1 to 2 weeks to acclimatise, but clearly those countries that are used to training and competing in the heat, so the South American teams, do have an advantage. It would be a good tactic for the South American teams to exploit their familiarisation with the heat and humidity, and if they're used to playing in those conditions, to maybe try and vary the pace, slow, fast, which is actually akin to the kind of game that they do play. And that mental attention is going to be really important, because suddenly if a play develops which is over in sort of 20-30 seconds, then it could make the difference between preventing a goal or actually scoring a goal.
Perfect view of the football pitch here, which leads me on to my first question. A prolonged period of dry weather, how would that affect a football pitch?
We check the Met Office forecast very regularly. I mean, if we were to have an extended dry period, we'd keep the pitch nice and damp using our sprinkler system, just to stop the leaf from burning out.
Mark, what would be going through the mind of a groundskeeper out in Brazil at the moment then?
I mean, if we were out there, I mean, we would take into consideration the time into the games in the evenings. I mean, if you have a bit of evening dew like you do here at Plymouth, like on our evening games, I mean, we wouldn't put sprinkler systems on as much, because it would already be quite moist out there, and the ball would be quite fast playing anyway. So
I believe that no European team has won the World Cup when it's been played in the South Americas, so that does suggest some of the conditions of the heat and the humidity and even altitude do play a factor. Sports science and the preparation for our athletes is incredibly strong. So some of these factors now are being negated by the things we can put in. So the heat strategies, the fluid, the diets, the training preparations, the psychological interventions. So I'm hoping for good things for England.